Let's go ahead and talk about layers in Illustrator. We've touched upon layers in some of our previous exercises, and you probably realize that in Illustrator, you'll have access to the individual elements within a layer, and that's because this is a vector application. But we never created any of the layers. They were just created by the elements themselves or by the groups that we made of various elements. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and we're going to be a little bit more methodical and create layers for the individual parts of our character. This is going to help you when you're working in Illustrator, just in regards to staying organized. It's really helpful to have layers that have meaningful names and to put the various elements on their own layers, because then you'll be able to easily hide layers, lock layers, manipulate them in various ways. And it's going to be especially useful to us if we are wanting to ultimately utilize this particular character in another application. So if we wanted to animate this character at some point in the future, thinking about the various elements and how we might want to move and manipulate those and creating layers so that we can do that is going to be very important. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and start to move the various parts of my character onto their own layers. The first thing that I want to think about, since I ultimately will want to animate this, is the various pieces that I'm going to want to animate individually. So obviously we are probably going to want to animate our character and be able to move it, and we're going to need the shadow to be on its own separate layer, so we might as well just move the shadow to its own layer now. When we select any of the elements, they will become highlighted within the existing layer. You can see this piece of artwork has this little blue chip indicating that that element is selected. And it's also worth mentioning that you'll notice that some of the items in our layer are hollow circles and some have a filled circle. The filled circle indicates an element that has some sort of effect or something that we did inside of the appearance palette, so something extra. So for instance, this particular element, we applied the feather. That's why the circle is filled. I'm just pointing that out so you're aware of that difference. I'm going to create a new layer, and it creates a new layer up at the top. We'll name this layer Shadow. And then to move this element to the new layer, you can just grab this little square and move it up. And you'll notice that the color changes both in the layer and when the item is selected. Every layer has its own color that's associated, and that just makes it a little bit easier to know when you've selected something on a particular layer. If you go to the wing menu of the layer palette, you can go ahead and you can click options for shadow, for instance, and you could change the color. So if you wanted that to be something else, you could change it to any color you want. Sometimes it's helpful to have a selection color that differs from the element itself. And then we have some other options here. We can turn something into a template, which is great if you're trying to use it to trace. You can also lock the layer, which we're also able to do by just clicking right next to the eyeball. We can toggle showing the layer on and off, which is the same as turning the eyeball on and off. And if we have print selected, if we were to print this, this would be a layer that would be included in our print. So if you had layers that you did not want to print, you could turn this off. And right now we're viewing our artwork in preview mode, not outline mode. So that is also checked. And in addition, if you are using something as a template to trace, it is common that you would want to dim the images so that they're not at full opacity. But we're just going to leave everything as is. So I'll click OK. And just so you can see, here's the eyeball. Obviously that toggles the visibility of the layer. This would lock the layer. So now I can't accidentally grab this element and move it to a different location. Now what we'll do is we'll select the body portion. We're going to want all of the pieces of the body on their own layer. So let's just make a body layer. And I'll place this above the shadow layer. And what I can do is I can either select the elements on my artboard and move them, or we can select within the layer panel itself. So you can see that some of these have a bigger square and this one has a smaller square. If we open up this sublayer, you'll see how a couple of the elements are not selected. This is the little highlight that we have right here. So I'm going to want to hold down my Shift key and just select those items. And once everything in that grouped section is selected, the little square is not going to be small anymore. So now that all the pieces of my body are selected, I need to move them to the body layer. So if I grab these elements, I'm going to need to actually select all of the layers themselves, and I clicked on the bottom one and then Shift clicked on the top one, and then I'm just going to drag them to the body layer. And now I've moved them all onto the body layer. You can see how everything disappeared, and that's because the eyeball was off on this layer. But we obviously can see that all of these elements exist on the body layer. Now, because the body layer is in front of layer 1, we no longer see the eyes. They are now behind that. So let's go ahead and move those to their own layer. I'll make a new layer. We'll call this right eye. And I'm going to place the eyes on separate layers just in case we want to animate those individually. So currently my eyes are grouped, and let's just hide the body for now. If I want to separate these out, I'm going to need to select the grouped item and do Object Ungroup. And now that they're ungrouped, we can see that this is the right eyeball right here. I'll move that to the right eye layer. I'll make a new layer. We'll call this left eye. And let's just place this on top of everything else. And then we'll grab the left eye and place that up there. So there's our left eye. And now we can see that the body and the eyes are in the right order. And then I'm going to want to place my arms on their own layers. So once again, we have a right arm and a left arm. I'm going to select the right arm. We'll go ahead and make a new layer. We'll just call this right arm. And we'll drag this particular element to the right arm layer. Then I'm going to make another layer. We'll call this left arm. And we'll grab the other arm, place it on the left arm layer. And clearly you get the idea, right? And then this is our little antenna. I'm just going to name this. And I just need to make sure that this is behind the body. So the order seems to be fine. So now if we turn all of these off, you can see here's our antenna. Here's the right arm, left arm. Here's our shadow, which we've locked. Here's our body, right eye, and left eye. So now everything is all organized. We can still grab the whole entire character, and you can see we have different colors on the selections because they're all inside their own layers, but we can move this together as if it was one unit. We could do any of our other transformations, scale it, rotate it, whatever we need to do. So we still have a lot of flexibility, but we've just ensured that all of the different pieces are on their different layers, and later, if I want to animate this, I know that I can grab the right arm, and let's say we wanted to rotate this or something like that, we'll be able to perform the transformations on just that layer. So that's going to allow us to animate in a much more easy and convenient way. So just make sure you understand how to name your layers. When you're working in Illustrator, it's always a good idea to stay organized and to name the various pieces so later you can go back and find what you need.